Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworld.eldar.com. I'm Brent, and this is part 2 of my 10th edition Eldari Codex review. In part 1, I gave an overview of general impressions about how play and list building will have changed for Eldari post-Codex. And in part 2, I'm going to do a deep dive on the first of the detachments that I will be covering. I will cover all of them. I will talk about the aspect host in addition to the datasheets and point changes for aspect warriors, phoenix lords, and also autarchs, because one of the changes in the 10th edition codex is that autarchs and autarch wayleapers now join aspect units instead of guardian units, and the autarch skyrunner is simply gone. Before I dive in, I'll just say that I think generally aspect hosts are not only quite good, but also an especially good pick for newer or intermediate players, because I think that the making use of the bonuses and getting the most out of them is going to be a lot more straightforward than it will be for some of the other detachments. That said, there are no Eldari detachments that aren't going to be high skill cap and quite challenging. But if you're new to the faction, I think that this is a particularly strong pick for you, probably, unless you really love wraiths, because I think that the Spirit Conclave is going to be the other one that is probably among the most approachable. Okay, let's dive in. The detachment ability for the aspect host is called Path of the Warrior, and it's pretty straightforward. Anytime a unit with the aspect warrior keyword or the avatar of Cain either fights or shoots, you can choose to either reroll 1s to hit or reroll 1s to wound. Now, a lot of the time it won't particularly matter what you choose, but a lot of the time it will. So, for example, if there's some crucial or really good ability that triggers, say, on the hit roll, like lethal hits or sustained hits, obviously you would do better leaning into the hit roll. Sometimes you'll already have rerolls for one of these, like coming out of a falcon or something. You get a reroll to wounds, so obviously you lean into the hit roll. If you had access to devastating wounds, you'd want to reroll the wound roll and so on. It's also good for Overwatch, where I think you always choose the hit roll because it doubles the odds that you will hit on Overwatch. Because critically, this one works not just in the shoot phase and the fight phase, but any time that the unit shoots or fights. It's really good. It's really powerful. It's especially good on the avatar of Cain and helps to get that model where it needs to be after kind of a big come down from the days of the index. Obviously, if you're running an aspect host, a significant percentage of your list will be devoted to aspect warriors. And the good news is they are some of the most powerful units available to Codex Eldari, 10th edition Codex Eldari. While in the index days, vehicles and the avatar of Cain and maybe the Incarn were really the engine of a lot of lists, aspect warriors are no longer technical pieces that mostly help with scoring and move blocking and that sort of thing. Now they're also powerful target elimination units, and the aspect host helps you double and in some cases triple down on that roll. Okay, let's look at the 6 stratagems available to the aspect host, and then we'll look at enhancements, and then I'll run you through all of the data sheets and their points changes, and we'll talk about how these interact. The first of the stratagems is called Warrior's Focus, and you use it on either an aspect unit or the avatar of Cain. It's 1 CP, and it allows you to ignore all modifiers to your hit roll or the relevant skill, so like your weapon skill or your ballistic skill. So all modifiers to the hit roll ignored, and also to the damage roll, but not the wound roll. There will be matchups in which you simply do not use this one at all, and there will be matchups in which this is absolutely gold. Key enemy units that rely on abilities like stealth or stratagems that make them -1 to hit will not be able to avoid the ferocious damage output of your aspect warriors, who are also getting rerolls, right, from aspect host. But even better is the ability to remove damage reduction. Damage reduction is particularly powerful often into weapons that do like 2 damage, right? Because you're literally cutting the damage in half. Or weapons that do flat 3 into super heavy infantry like Terminators. We can significantly increase the survivability of units with 3 wounds if we can put -1 to damage on them. And so if you can remove that, it's a big deal. A number of other content creators have already talked about how the Avatar's 2 damage sweep attack can be mitigated into things like Space Marines in some builds having the output of the damage, and this is a way to just work around that. Oh, it's also worth noting that the term any/all, you can choose to accept a modifier. So if you're giving one of your units +1 to hit, this does not prevent you from getting that bonus. You do decide the way it's phrased on the stratagem. The next one is to their final breath. I already talked about this in an earlier video because it was revealed early by GW. This is used in the fight phase, and it can only work on aspects or the avatar. You on a 4-up when a model dies, right? That model can fight on death. It fights one more time before it's removed. I already said in an earlier video that this can be absolutely amazing on the Avatar of Cain, who is to the Warhammer world of melee combat what Hannibal Lecter is to the world of elegant movie villains, just top tier stuff. So getting one more attack with your Avatar of Cain could really be game changing. And if you're using this on Shining Spears or on Banshees or Scorpions, Aspect Warriors now have Aspect Shrine tokens that can be expended to trigger an ability on the datasheet. Generally speaking, they have 1 Aspect token for every 5 models in the unit, and they can expend one of these tokens to change 1 hit or wound roll to an automatic 6. But then in the Aspect Host, you can use these tokens to also make the stratagems better. And if you're running the Aspect Host, I think that's probably how you're going to use just about all of these tokens. In this case, you could expend an Aspect token to fight on a 3-up instead of a 4-up. You might occasionally do this with Banshees or Scorpions, but it is pretty situational. I think the only time this is going to matter a ton is the Avatar of Cain. But also every now and then in the late game, you have like a single like Warp Spider Exarch or something tussling for an objective and the ability to like kill the last enemy model. It could matter, but this is a situational one, not a use it every game one. Okay, Skyborn Sanctuary. This is absolutely fabulous, and it also appears in multiple detachments, which is great because it is one of the best stratagems available to the Eldari in this book anywhere. It's amazing. It lets you get back into a transport for a command point at the end of the fight phase with any unit that is within 6 inches of a friendly transport. So it doesn't have to be aspects. This has 2 massive bonuses. The first is that it gives that unit tremendous mobility, right? You could potentially then move the transport on the next turn and have the unit jump out and do the thing. So there's all sorts of crazy stuff you could do with this. A unit of fire dragons, which are insanely good in this edition, by the way, could zip up the board in a falcon, jump out, completely blow away an enemy tank or monster, and then in the fight phase get back in the falcon and be ready to zip somewhere else on the board and do the same thing on your next turn. You could jump out of fire dragons probably are going to ride around in wave serpents, not falcons, for reasons, but nevertheless, same difference. Similarly, a unit of howling banshees could jump out of a falcon, move, charge some enemy unit, kill the enemy unit using the fire support ability from the falcon. They let you re-roll wound rolls the way they did before. And when you make the move with the falcon, you could move it to be near the reapers again. So after they kill the banshees. So after they kill the thing, they could jump back in the falcon and be this like mobile melee unit yet again. So those kinds of tricks are neat, but also just increasing the survivability of your aspect warriors. You can park a transport entirely out of line of sight behind terrain, have the aspect warriors get out, sort of poke out from the terrain while remaining within 6 inches of the transport, shoot something, and then jump back in the transport, not even necessarily to reposition, but just to be safe during an opponent's turn. It's worth noting also that because this happens during the fight phase, you could use it on an opponent's turn also. So you could potentially use this power with fade back. So you could have a unit that is not within 6 inches of a transport, get shot by an enemy unit, fade back closer to the transport, and then get in at the end of the fight phase. That's really good. And one of the tricks I expect to use when I run the Aspect Host that a lot of other people are also planning to make use of, 10 Dark Reapers with an Autarch, especially with one of the enhancements, which I'll talk about later, is a pretty sick combo in this Codex, and 3 of the detachments have really good ways to keep the Reapers alive. Any big block of Reapers can use fade back, right? But you're still probably losing some models if they fade back. But the 2 detachments that have access to Skyborn Sanctuary and also the Seer Council have other ways to give them additional survivability. 10 Reapers and an Autarch, you do have to bunch them up a little bit, but they can absolutely jump back in a Wave Serpent behind a piece of terrain every turn and just be this incredible long-range damage engine that's a little bit hard to counter. Super good, really powerful. If you run Aspect Host, you're going to use this one a ton. The next stratagem is also 1 CP. It's called Doom Inescapable. It only works on the Avatar of Khaine and only when the Avatar of Khaine shoots. Overall, the Avatar of Khaine has gotten some pretty significant nerfs to its durability. I mentioned in my last video that it's lost a point of toughness. Well, we'll talk about changes to the Avatar in a moment, but it's neither as durable nor as killy as it used to be. And this stratagem helps restore a little bit of that reliable killiness in this one detachment. In the index days, we would often use fate dice on the Avatar to max out its damage, and essentially this stratagem is taking the place of the ability to use a fate die to guarantee that the Avatar did, 8 damage with a shooting attack with the Wailing Doom. Oh, it also increases the range of the attack to 18 inches. So you have to use the stratagem when you shoot with the Avatar, which means you're probably going to hit because the Avatar hits on a 2-up, and you could always use your rerolls to more or less guarantee that you hit. The strength's really high. You'll probably wound, but if you don't, or if the opponent makes an invulnerable save or something, then the stratagem is just sort of wasted. But into a target that you stand a good chance of wounding, that has exactly 7 or 8 wounds and needs to die and doesn't have an invuln save, this could be pretty clutch, but it is situational. Nevertheless, I think that if you run the Avatar, and there's a good argument for doing that in this particular detachment, there will definitely be games where it will make sense to use this. All right, the next one, Preternatural Precision, I also discussed in an earlier video because it was revealed early by Games Workshop. It only works on Aspect Warrior units that are shooting units, and when you declare that you're going to shoot with them, you can give that unit one of the following for 1 CP: lethal hits, sustained hits 1, ignores cover, or you can burn a shrine token to give the unit 2. Now, there's some pretty wicked combos available here for sure. Dark Reapers to have a much improved damage profile and pretty good fire output, and the ability to give them lethal hits into hard targets with their flat 3 damage weapons, and then to use the Aspect Host ability to reroll ones to hit. That's pretty good. Similarly, Fire Dragons, which can reroll their hit rolls and wound rolls, giving them sustained hits to generate even more. That's pretty amazing. Ignoring cover into some targets will make sense. There are other ways to strip cover. But with low fire output units like Fire Dragons that only have, say, 5 shots, it often may make sense to choose sustained hits 1, not burn the shrine token for an extra thing, but then use the shrine token to guarantee that one of those hit rolls is a 6 and you trigger the sustained hits 1. This is also really powerful with Dire Avengers. Dire Avengers, 5 Dire Avengers now put out 20 shots, 10 put out 40 shots. And if you're within half range for their shuriken cannons, they get, or their catapults, they get sustained hits. Having them also ignore cover and get lethal hits, or maybe get sustained hits not at half range. The sheer number of dice you roll means that you'll probably get, you'll trigger this a fair number of times. Swooping Hawks 2 have really good fire output and may often want to to cancel cover. You're going to use this every single. If you run an aspect host, I think you probably should be using this just about every single turn. It is a fabulous damage multiplier, and I may mention it a few more times in this video when I talk about combos with possible units later in the video. The last one is called Kane's Vengeance, and if an enemy tries to fall back from combat with one of your aspect units or the Avatar of Kane, you can make them take a desperate escape test, which can be pretty brutal. You can inflict some misery with that, and they're at -1 on the test if they're also battle shocked, which is good. This has pretty nice synergy with the Sudden Strike Battle Focus ability that makes it possible, among other things, to make a 6-inch consolidation move after combat. So potentially something like the Avatar of Kane or a unit of Harlequins or Banshees could slam into another unit. Well, the Harlequins don't benefit from this because they're not aspects, but they can use a Sudden Strike. But in this detachment, Banshees or the Avatar of Kane or Scorpions or something, after they kill something in melee, can slam 6 inches into another unit, and it may be a unit your opponent was trying to screen, and so punishing them for trying to fall back from that engagement could be good. But again, this I think is a more situational one. The really amazing ones that I think are going to soak up most of your points are definitely Preternatural Precision, Skyborn Sanctuary, and occasionally probably Warrior Focus. But Skyborn and Preternatural are just amazing. Okay, let's look at the enhancements. There are 4. The first one is Aspect of Murder, and it just gives +1 damage to an Autarch's melee weapon. The best melee weapon, I think, remains the Starglaive, which is cool because that's what we built them with before. And I especially like this with an Autarch that's running with either a foot Autarch running with a unit of Striking Scorpions, which can scout before the game begins. And if you get first turn, probably you're going to want to do that. Having a credible melee character threat in the midfield at the beginning of the game could be really good. And then I also like it on an MSU Warp Spider unit that has built the Exarch with the 4 blades, which is actually a pretty hefty melee unit. So you end up with this mind-bogglingly fast melee unit that can get close enough to charge anything and then is pretty terrifying in melee combat. That said, Lhykhis, the Striking Scorpion Phoenix Lord, is so good that you're probably only considering this combo if you already have Lhykhis with 5 Warp Spiders. I think Lhykhis is around 50 points more and totally worth it. The next option is Mantle of Wisdom, and this lets an Autarch leading an aspect unit trigger both of the detachment rules for the whole aspect unit. So they get they reroll 1s to hit and they reroll 1s to wound. And my absolute favorite unit use of this, without a doubt, is a 10 Elf Dark Reaper unit led by an Autarch with a Reaper launcher that is going to jump back in a Wave Serpent after they lay down Murderous Fire. And after they probably also trigger Preternatural Precision. So you could, depending on what they're targeting, choose to give them sustained hits, have them reroll 1s to hit, which would increase their sustained hits, or lethal hits, and then also have them reroll 1s to wound. Especially, I think, when you're trying to punch up into harder targets. The anti-hard target elimination on the Reapers is Strength 10, flat 3 damage, which will struggle a little bit into stuff that's T11, T12. But if you're able to reroll the hit roll with an option of maybe getting lethal hits from Preternatural Precision, but then also reroll 1s on the wound roll, suddenly that's pretty freaking dangerous. And then jumping back in a nearby Wave Serpent out of line of sight, and then being able to like move them around in the Wave Serpent, especially in the later part of the game, that's a really powerful combo. I like this one a lot. The next one is the Shimmer Stone. You also give that to an Autarch leading an Aspect Warrior unit. It makes the whole unit -1 to wound. It does have nice synergy with the Fade Back battle focus ability that lets the unit move after being shot, because you can limit, obviously, right? You can limit damage to the unit when it does its Fade Back move through the thing. but I think I would rather have the mantle on my Reaper unit. I know I would. I think my dragons are probably jumping back in a falcon. My Dire Avengers are probably going to run with Asurmen and do the thing anyway. I think this one might struggle a little bit to find a place in lists, but who knows? I could be wrong. Early days here. The last one, Strategic Savant, gives the unit plus 10 OC, and obviously it has to be led by an Autarch to do the thing. This is the kind of thing that might be really powerful in the hands of a clever player who's using it just right. Using it, for example, on a unit of Banshees that's like jumping out of a transport 3 inches from the transport, making an advance move using battle focus such that they're going 10 plus D6 and they can still charge to jump onto an objective to mess up an enemy and also just have crazy OC on the objective is super cool. You might be able to do something vaguely similar with Hawks. I don't totally love it on Spiders because of the way the flicker jump ability. Well, actually, no, you know what? No, it's also really good on Spiders. I completely take that back. The ability to go like 24 inches onto, and then maybe charge right onto to get on some objective in your opponent's backfield and just totally blow them out of the water with OC could be really good, even if you're on there with something you just can't kill that would normally have more OC. But this one I think is super meta dependent. I don't think will appear in my initial lists, but I could certainly see it appearing as a really useful tool in some really excellent lists run by really excellent players. But again, I think it might come down to the meta. Like, what are the people you play against or you're seeing at tournaments likely to be running, and is this a tool you need? Here's the other thing. Eldari are so killy, and some of these aspect units are so killy, you can reasonably ask, like, am I going to need the extra OC? Or are there other tricks I can use to simply deprive my opponent of OC the old-fashioned way by killing their models? Okay, let's talk data sheets. I will talk about the data sheets that are most directly relevant to this detachment. So I'm going to talk about the two Autarch builds, the Aspect Warriors, and as I do each Aspect Warrior, I'll do their relevant Phoenix Lord. Let's do the Autarchs first. You probably already know that Autarchs are in a very different role this time around. For Index Eldari, Autarchs, one Autarch at least in every list was an essential CP engine, and we were normally taking the Autarch Wayleaper because its lone operative ability really helped with backfield objective control, and it could have a pretty powerful close range shooting and melee loadout as a backfield deterrent and late game counterpuncher. Now, Autarchs juice up aspect squads. That's what they do. They're like more affordable mini Phoenix Lords. The regular foot Autarch is 75 points. Incidentally, the point values that I'm giving you are correct. The point values in the book are not correct. GW is doing a points update on the day of the release, and they've already given those points updates to a number of content creators who had early access, including Art of War, and those have all already been revealed. The Autarch has all the same loadout options it did before, and just like before, there are some pretty standout, obvious picks. I think that for its melee weapon, it has the same stat line that it did before. It's a 7-inch move, T3, a 3-up save, 4 wounds, leadership 6+, OC 1. For its melee weapon, I think you want the Starglaive, which has 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 6, -3 AP, flat 3 damage, which is really good. Each failed save auto kills heavy infantry. And of course, if you juice it with the enhancement that gives it +1 to its damage output, the ability to do 4 damage, well, that's actually pretty good into light tanks and monsters. So if you were running with something like a unit of Scorpions in combination with the reroll ability, rerolling 1s to wound, potentially, that unit could not only threaten infantry, but also threaten some heavy stuff. But on the other hand, we've got a lot of ways to kill those types of units more effectively, probably. There are, I think, 2 possible reasonable picks for a shooting weapon. One is to just take the fusion gun, which we know and love, and a lot of our Autarchs are probably built with those. Some people were running Autarchs in the Index with Storm Guardians. The fusion gun is a 12-inch 1 attack, hitting on 2s, strength 9, -4, D6 damage, but melt to 3. So within 6 inches would do D6 +3 damage, and it has the assault keyword, which obviously is going to have good synergy with stuff like Banshees and Scorpions. But my pick for the best Autarch build in the aspect detachment is to give it the Starglaive, because why not? And then the Reaper launcher. There are two possible damage outputs for the Reaper launcher. There's just like before. There's the Star Shot, which has the heavy keyword, so +1 to hit if you don't move, and it ignores cover. Hitting on 3s, strength 10, -2 AP, flat 3 damage. So good. And of course, if you're running it with that big squad of Reapers, and you give this guy the Mantle of Wisdom, you're rerolling your 1s to hit, you're rerolling your 1s to wound, you're ignoring cover, and if you also use Preternatural Precision, you could give them all sustained hits and or lethal hit. It's a pretty sick combo. It's really good. And the other advantage to running this guy with those Reapers, as I already mentioned, probably what they want to do is jump in a transport, a Wave Serpent in the fight phase after they've done the shooting thing. And this guy, the Path of Command ability, the ability called Path of Command still exists, as well it should. But what it does is different. Now you reduce the cost of a stratagem by 1. You can use this once per battle round, which means you could use Skyborn Sanctuary for free. The whole Dark Reaper unit could just jump into a transport, and it doesn't cost you anything. Now, the Autarch also lets the unit that he leads reroll all advance rolls and all rolls involving an agile maneuver, which could be really good for something like Fade Back. But generally speaking, for the points, 75 points, that can get you, in many cases, almost or literally a whole nother aspect squad. And I think Howling Banshees are better off just taking their Phoenix Lord for another, 30 points. You can get Jane Czar. I think Dire Avengers are probably better off just taking their Phoenix Lord. Asurmen's a little expensive, but he's amazingly good. Striking Scorpions may want to consider running this guy, as I already mentioned, but they're currently the cheapest aspect option, and they're a pretty good like scout and trade action monkey unit. And once you stick an Autarch in there, now it's like this really expensive unit that actually has to do some work for you, and it totally changes the identity of a unit in a way you may not want to. Hawks probably just want Baharroth because he gives them that uppy downy power where they can jump off the field and land somewhere else. Fuegan's amazing, and you also just don't really need an Autarch to make Fire Dragons do their job really effectively. So out of the gate, I really think the pick for the Autarch is Reapers, and certainly going to be in my initial list. That said, I'm sure that clever players and in the States and other places in the world will figure out ways to integrate Autarchs into some of these other units and make them really work for them. I think there are some interesting options for synergies here, and I think that plenty of aspect host lists will very effectively integrate this unit. Okay, the Autarch Wayleaper. Again, I already mentioned it doesn't have Lone Op anymore. Similarly, the only thing this thing is going to do for you is lead either Warp Spiders or Swooping Hawks, and it has exactly the same weapon options as the Foot Autarch. It has the same stat line. The only difference is it has a 14-inch move. And instead of the ability to reroll battle focus movement rolls and reroll advance rolls, the Autarch Wayleaper gives you the ability, it's called Indomitable Strength of Will. It gives you the ability to roll a d6 when you use a battle focus token, and on a 3-up you get it back, and that's pretty good. But it is not on its own a reason to take the thing. You take the Autarch Wayleaper to turn a unit, an MSU unit of Warp Spiders or Hawks into an extra juicy combat threat. Putting the Starglaive in the unit with the Hawks or the Spiders and a fusion gun, and I really think that's the build, which is good because that's what we've all got already. Is pretty freaking sick. It's cool with Spiders too because it has the grenade keyword. So like your unit of Warp Spiders, you could move the 14 inches, or you could do the flicker jump thing, throw a grenade, do on average 3 mortal wounds, shoot with the stuff, charge, have the super melee loadout on the Warp Spider Exarch and the Starglaive on the Autarch. And I guess you could juice it up with a -1 damage output and have it be like pretty decent into hard targets. I probably wouldn't. But a unit of Warp Spiders is 95 points for 5, and the Autarch Wayleaper is 80. So this is a 175-point unit that can jump into your opponent's backfield on turn 1, throw a grenade at something for some mortal wounds, shoot it with a fusion gun with some pretty crazy rerolls, probably at a close enough range to trigger Melta, turn a bunch of Death Spinners on something, which is no joke, and then charge and carve stuff up with some Exarch blades and the Starglaive. That's a pretty great tool. You probably take Lhykhis first, but that's a pretty great tool. And I think I said in my introductory Eldari video that I think one of the things we're going to have to do to make Eldari effective post Codex is to have some really powerful Alpha Strike units in our army to take away. Many opponents will have 2 or 3 tools that will be particularly effective into Eldar because of their mobility or whatever. And so being able to jump into your opponent's backfield or wherever you need to get to on turn 1 and tie those things down or kill those things may be the difference between victory and defeat. So if I use a Wayleaper in my initial aspect host lists, this is how I imagine doing it, and I very likely might. I think it's really good. But there's certainly a lot of competition for slots because there are so many things that are good. Let's talk about one of those things. Fire Dragons. Let's talk about Fire Dragons and Fuegan, in part because this is one of the best units in the game, people. It is so fabulous. If you are running an aspect host, I definitely think you want at minimum 10 Fire Dragons. There is an argument for having them in a single squad, surprisingly, led by Fuegan. Or 2 units of 5, or maybe 3 5s, or a 10 and a 5. They're so freaking good. They're 100 points. Let's take a look at the data sheet. Or let's talk about the data sheet because I can't show it to you yet because the reasons. Fire Dragons have the standard aspect warrior stat line, 7-inch move, T3, but they've got the heavy armor saving on a 3-up, 1 wound. The Exarch has 2, 6-up leadership, 1 OC, just like before. The regular fusion gun, I think it's the same stat line that we're familiar with. An assault, it's got assault, which is obviously good. 12-inch range, 1 attack, hitting on 3s, strength 9, -4 AP, D6 damage, Melta 3. So I already mentioned this when I was talking about the Exarch. If you're within 6 inches, it's doing D6 plus 3, which is crazy. But they have this ability, Assured Destruction, against monsters and vehicles. They reroll all of their hit dice and all of their wound dice, which is absolutely bonkers. That means the strength 9 on the fusion gun has a better than 50% chance of wounding stuff, around 50% chance of wounding stuff that is, T12, which is really good. And also, of course, because of the aspect host rule, you can they get full rerolls. So the aspect host rule actually only helps them if they're shooting like infantry, if you're shooting Terminators or something. But you could, of course, further enhance them by triggering the preternatural precision to give them either lethal hits against something really tough, or sustained hits, or possibly even both if you burn the aspect shrine token. But the Exarch loadout is absolutely crazy. It's so good. It significantly increases the overall damage output of the squad and what you can think about targeting. There are 3 possibilities. Regular dragons can also take flamers. Don't do that. The Exarch has a choice between the Fire Pike, a regular fusion gun, but the Exarch's regular fusion gun is Melta 6, which is insane. It does D6 plus 6 damage. So, here's potentially a dirty trick you could pull if you choose the Melta gun on the Exarch, or the fusion gun on the Exarch. Excuse me. You move a Wave Serpent with, say, 2 separate units of Fire Dragons in it, or 1 unit of Fire Dragons and 1 unit of something else. But you move a Wave Serpent to the midfield on turn 1, and on turn 2, the dragons either jump out of the Wave Serpent, make an advance move because they have assault weapons, and then shoot, or you move the transport they get out and you shoot, depending on the situation. But the dragons inside can potentially threaten 2 different enemy tanks. And here's how this works. Like, they jump out, and the 4 dragons, the regular dragons, shoot 1 enemy tank, and the Exarch with the super juiced Melta-gun within Melta range shoots a different enemy tank. You use the preternatural precision stratagem and select sustained hits 1. You do not use an aspect shrine token to also trigger something else. Instead, you use your aspect shrine token to automatically do a critical hit with the Exarch to the tank that the Exarch shot. So the tank that the Exarch shot is automatically getting hit with 2 strength 9 hits with full wound rerolls, each of which is doing flat 6 plus d6 damage. And the other 4 dragons are all shooting some tank with full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound, each one doing d6 plus 3 damage. And then potentially they use Skyborn Sanctuary to jump back in the transport. That's not bad. And even if they can't and they die, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that was a pretty juicy trade. Now, your other option, of course, is to give the Exarch one of the other loadouts. One option is the Fire Pike. The big advantage to the Fire Pike is additional range and additional strength. So it's 18 instead of 12. It's still Assault and Melta 3, but it's 18 instead of 12. It still hits on 3s. And it's strength 12 instead of strength 9, minus 4 d6. You can trigger Melta from further away. And I think this is especially worthwhile thinking about if you're running the squad led by Fuegan. And I'll talk about that combo in just a moment. And I think there's a different way you play it if you do that. Well, maybe. It opens up another play option. Basically, Fuegan gives the whole squad additional range, and his long-range fire pikey lance shot thing is such that coming in out of deep strike, at least Fuegan and the Exarch will be close enough to trigger their Melta abilities, so you don't even need a transport. But the Skyborn Sanctuary thing is nice. But before we talk about Fuegan's datasheet, let's briefly talk about the other option, which is the Fire Axe, which is a baby version of Fuegan's Fire Axe, and also a pistol that is just a short-range fusion gun. So the pistol is just a fusion gun with a 6-inch range and the pistol keyword, so you can still shoot it in melee. And the Fire Axe has 3 attacks at hitting on 3s at strength 6, minus 4 AP, with d6 damage. That's pretty cool. And I guess has nice synergy because Fuegan himself has a good melee profile. It gives the squad more play into like heavy infantry. If you had to multi-class into killing some heavy infantry, right? Something that, or even just not heavy infantry, some Space Marines or like something that's not a tank or a monster. And honestly, the best reason to use this loadout is that you have one of the old Fuegan miniatures from before, which is now too small to be Fuegan, but sure could be an Exarch with a Fire Axe. I guess you'd have to cut down the lance. You probably don't want to spoil the old model. I don't know. I don't think this is one of the most competitive picks. But if you're playing narrative and you just really like how it looks because it does look super cool, it certainly doesn't suck. Okay, let's take a look at Fuegan and how he can take a unit of fire dragons from one of the very best units in the game to maybe the best unit in the game. He's just so crazy good. I don't think you run him as alone on his own. I think you definitely run him with dragons, but wow. He is 120 points, which is so heckin' worth it. It is as much as an entire additional squad of dragons, more than as much as an entire additional squad of dragons, but he gives the squad additional utility, not only with that range bonus I just talked about, but also with crazy additional damage output. So Fuegan has the Seer Song, the relic weapon. It has an anti-heavy infantry profile, which you will rarely use, and then it has the lance profile, which is just crazy good. It's like a better version of the fire pike. It has an 18-inch range, but if he's leading a unit of fire dragons, it actually has a 24-inch range because he gives +6 to Melta weapons equipped by the squad that he is leading, and he is in his own squad. So in the squad of fire dragons, if you give Fuegan, or well, he has the Seer Song. If you give the Exarch the fire pike, Fuegan and the Exarch will both have 24-inch range melta weapons, which means if you bring them in out of reserve, or you move them with a deep strike move, if you were running the Seer Council, not this, you could drop them within 9 inches of an enemy unit and be within melta range for the 2 hardest hitting models in the squad. The Seer Song Lance profile, it's 1 attack, it hits on 2s, strength 14, AP minus 4, D6 damage, but Melta 6, so D6 plus 6 like the Fire Pike. And again, you can use that trick I just talked about with Preternatural and the unit token to give Fuegan sustained hits 1 in the unit, use the unit token to guarantee that he triggers it, so he hits a target twice automatically at strength 14 with full wound rerolls at minus 4 AP. Each of them flat 6 plus D6 damage, and then the Exarch would be adding 1 more similar attack. That's crazy. Again, if even just with 5 fire dragons with the fire pike, you could bring them in, and you could, with that 1 unit, destroy 2 enemy hard targets, 2 enemy tanks, or the whole unit might even just be able to like take down a knight. Knights are going to absolutely hate playing into aspect hosts with a bunch of fire dragon units. Now that said, invulnerable saves are still a thing. None of this is giving you a way to just cheat invulnerable saves, because this is not, we no longer live in the universe of automatically triggerable devastating wounds. But anything that does not have a pretty good invulnerable save, any tank or monster that does not have a pretty good invulnerable save, is going to be pretty vulnerable to fire dragons. In fact, I could see this shifting the whole meta, quite honestly, back towards durable heavy infantry and highly mobile, durable, lighter stuff. It's also going to make screening so much more important. Screening is already a big part of the game, but wow. But with the kind of range that you have with Fuegan and the Exarch, it's pretty hard to screen, right? I mean, with the battle focus ability, the whole squad can move jump 3 inches out of a transport, move 9 plus D6, and then still have a 12-inch melta range. Like that's pretty hard to shut down. Let's talk about some other things that Fuegan does for your dragons, because it doesn't stop there. He has a fire axe, right? It's got 6 attacks, weapon skill 2 up, strength 5, minus 4 AP, flat 3 damage. Suddenly, this squad is really good into heavy infantry, especially in combination with the beam attack on the Seer Song, which is only a 12-inch range, 3 attacks, but sustained hits 2. So if you were to use if you needed to, I guess, if you were to use the squad token, you could automatically trigger, you could give yourself reroll 1s to hit, automatically trigger at least 2 sustained hits, probably hit an average of like, I don't know, 5, sometimes 5 point something times with this. It's strength 8, so it'll wound stuff like Marines on a 2 up, minus 3 AP, flat 2 damage, Melta 1, which means can also kill Terminators at close range. And then you could charge in with the fire axe and finish them off. But then also, Fuegan still resurrects at the end of phase on 2 up when he dies, which means Fuegan and some fire dragons that jump out of a transport and get into the enemy backfield, and Fuegan and the Exarch, or Fuegan blows up something on his own, the Exarch on the squad blows up something else. Even if you can't Skyborn Sanctuary them, your opponent kills all the fire dragons, but then Fuegan stands back up and probably kills something again on your turn before he dies, or helps cinch an objective or something. And yeah, they could charge him and try to kill him in melee, but you better freaking hope you kill him in melee, because he is also a punchy melee threat. And you could use Fade Back with them, so maybe it's pretty hard if they run through a ruin or something, maybe shooting down the whole squad, including Fuegan, and also killing him again in melee. That might not even be on the table. Like, this is such a powerful tool. It's good in any detachment. It's especially good in an aspect host because of the crazy sustained hits trick on either Fuegan or the Exarch to possibly like double the number of targets that you could eliminate with average dice. But regardless of the detachment, Fire Dragons and Fuegan are one of the most powerful target elimination tools available to Eldari post-Codex. It's no longer Warhost rerolls and Fate dice. Now it's stuff like this. And of the category of stuff like this might be our shiniest piece of stuff. Okay, let's talk about Dark Reapers. I have already talked about Dark Reapers a fair amount, so let's take a look. I'm sorry, let's not take a look. Let's look at pictures of the models on the screen while I tell you about them. Because I think that while this information is now public information, I think maybe we're still not supposed to show data cards. I don't know. Okay, so Reapers are 90 points for 5 and 180 for 10. Both are good. I've already said I really like them in 10s with the Autarch, with the launcher, who can use his ability to let them use Skyborn Sanctuary for free and jump in and out of a Wave Serpent. Wave Serpents are only 115 points this time around. They're really good. It's a great price point. And while Codex Dark Reapers were almost good, or Index Dark Reapers were almost good, Codex Dark Reapers are actually good. And I kind of sort of already told you about them a bit because I talked about the profile on the launcher when I talked about the Autarch. They've got the standard Aspect Warrior stat line with the heavy armor, so they've got the 3-up save. Oh, and all Aspect Warriors still have their 5-up invuln, and then they have their inescapable accuracy ability, which means that you can ignore modifiers to the ballistic and the hit roll, which is great. And gives them really good synergy with the preternatural shooting thing, and also just the Aspect Warrior rerolls. Like, I think that Reapers are often going to make good use of the sustained and lethal hits. I've already talked about that. But I also think that they're particularly good in an aspect host detachment because we have that stratagem that lets us ignore damage reduction. And the Reaper launcher has 2 different profiles. One of them, which is flat 3 damage, ignoring cover with the heavy keyword. So it hits on 2s if you don't move with them. Usually you're going to move with them, though, let's be honest. And so the ability to ignore damage reduction to stuff like Terminators makes these things like extra reliable and awesome, which is great. Once again, the Reaper launcher hits on 3s. It's either strength 10 -2 flat 3 or strength 4 -2 flat 1, but then you double the number of attacks. That's like the anti-regular infantry 1. And both of them ignore cover, which is almost like another point of AP. And it's worth remembering that because of the ability on Warwalkers, any of your stuff can potentially get an additional -1 AP into targets, which is pretty awesome and could make things like Reaper launchers, strength 10 Reaper launchers with the rerolls, especially if you give them lethal hits, effective into T12 tanks. And this is good. Reapers didn't quite have a role before, and Reapers have returned to being units that can threaten enemy tanks and monsters, especially if you have big units of them and you're running the aspect detachment, and you can give them both lethal hits and sustained hits, or just one of those even. The Exarch still has the option to take an Eldari missile launcher, a Tempest launcher, or a Shuriken cannon. I think it's probably still the Tempest launcher. It's got a 36-inch range. It fires 2d6 shots. Hitting on 3 is strength 4 -1 AP, 1 damage. In matchups where you want to be able to chew up T3 bodies that are out of line of sight over the course of the game, if your opponent's not really like showing a lot, that's fine. I also think it's totally fine to consider giving your Exarch a different weapon. I'm probably going to do the Tempest launcher. I wouldn't do the Shuriken cannon It partially just because it has a 24-inch range, and the Reapers are going to want to be able to reach out and touch something on the extreme other side of the board. One of the advantages to the Reaper launcher has always been that 48-inch range. One of the things they do is outrange opponents. But I guess you could opt for the missile launcher and have a little bit of flexibility. Although a third of the time, that thing's going to do less damage than if you just chose the Reaper launcher. I think in a 10-elf squad with the Autarch, it makes sense to take the Tempest launcher because it just adds some diversity to what the squad can do. And if you focus fire from the Tempest launcher, it's almost as good probably as another Reaper launcher into a hard target that you can see. And it's nice to also have the option to multi-class into indirect. And I've already talked about how to use these things. I think if you give the Autarch the Mantle of Wisdom and they're rerolling all their ones to hit and wound, and you're also giving them sustained and lethal, they're amazing. Okay, let's look at Maugan Ra. Spoiler alert, he's the only Phoenix Lord, in my opinion, that really doesn't get there, and he almost does. He is the cheapest one at 100 points, which is good. That's good. But you don't really want him to lead your Reapers because you could get 5 more Reapers for less than Maugan Ra, and what he gives you is a 36-inch range on his gun, which has 6 attacks. It hits on 2s. It's strength 7, -2, flat 2 damage. It also ignores cover. It does have devastating wounds, and you could use a Reaper Shrine token to push through a couple of devastating wounds. I guess if you were in a big unit of Reapers, you could push through 4 devastating wounds. That would actually be pretty good, but maybe you just want more Reapers. He has the Harvester of Souls ability. While leading a squad, you can target if you target the entire unit against one enemy unit, roll a d6 for the target unit, and every other one within 3 inches on a 5+ takes damage after the shooting has happened. So basically what this means is you do splash damage to units within 3 inches on a 5 up. It's so easy for your opponents to play around this, and it's D3 mortals. It's kind of fine. Units it shoots have to take a battle shock test. He's just not worth it. In my opinion, the easiest way to fix Maugan Ra would have been to just give him Lone Op. Don't have him run with Reapers. And also, just in terms of the lore, if there's one Phoenix Lord that doesn't need to run with its aspect squad to make sense from it's Maugan Ra. He's the creepy goth kid at the posh high school who sits alone at lunch, and even his friends are kind of afraid of him. With Lone Op, I think he would have a role, and without it, I think he really doesn't. Okay, we really need to talk about warp spiders because aside from fire dragons, Lhykhis and warp spiders are just the most insane tool in the world. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about Crimson Hunters first because technically they're aspect warriors. And if I don't talk about them, I'm going to forget. I forget that Crimson Hunters are aspect warriors and that they exist at all a lot of the time. Now, despite the fact that aircraft in 10th edition for the most part have been abysmally horrible, the Crimson Hunter is not horrendous. And exclusively an aspect hosts, it's maybe kind of okay. There might be metas in which it makes sense to think about this thing. So because it's an aircraft, it's coming in from strategic reserves on turn 2. And that means that it's going to get to do some shooting before an opponent does anything about it. And because it's an aircraft, it can see through obscuring terrain. And you are going to build it with the pulse laser, which it has to have, and 2 bright lances, which is a good weapons loadout. So it will put out 3 shots hitting on 3s at strength 9 -2d6, and 2 bright lance shots hitting on 3s strength 12 -3 d6 plus 2, and it will be able to reroll all its hit rolls or all its wound rolls. Or you could use a CP and let it do both, which would be pretty good because it's an aspect warrior. It does all the aspect warrior stuff. And you could give it sustained hits 1 and hope that in those 5 dice you roll, one of them procs an extra hit. It doesn't have any aspect shrine tokens, so you can't do the trick. It's really fragile. It's T8 with a 3-up save, 12 wounds. It's got a 5-up invuln, and it's just not hard to kill. It does have +1 to hit and wound into enemy flyers. It's actually quite good into enemy flying units. But here's the thing. In a world in which we have mobile fire dragons and 65-point vipers that can make use of star engines to go like 14 plus D6 plus 1 inch and still shoot, we just might not really need a turn 2 enemy transport hunter, which I think that's kind of what this is. Like it shows up on turn 2 and it can destroy a transport that your enemy is hiding that doesn't have an invulnerable save more or less anywhere on the board, probably, unless you roll badly. I don't see using this at 160 points, but there may be metas out there where it would make a certain amount of sense. Okay, so warp spiders. The first thing you need to know is that they're really good. I think these are an auto-include, certainly in every aspect host detachment, possibly in every single Eldari army, in part because the Warp Spider Phoenix Lord Lhykhis is so good, but also because they're just good in their own right. They work quite a bit like the Warp Spiders that we were running before in terms of how they play, but there are some differences. They don't have devastating wounds anymore, but their standard weapon, the Death Spinner, did get -1 AP. It's a torrent weapon that ignores cover, which also helps with AP. So you don't get to put wounds on really durable stuff simply by virtue of having devastating, but it's a bit better into infantry than it was before. And the real value of this unit is partially just its cost relative to its mobility. So it's a 95-point unit. It's come way down from where it was in the index. And like before, it can either move 12 inches or do a flicker jump and move 24. The cost of doing the flicker jump is greater than it used to be, right? You used to roll a d6, and on a 1 you take a mortal wound, and now you roll a d6 for every model in the unit, and every one you roll involves taking a mortal wound. The Exarch still has 2 wounds, so if you just roll 1, which is statistically average, you could take it on the Exarch and not lose any models. But if you roll poorly, you could lose 2 or maybe even 3 Warp Spiders doing this. It's certainly possible, but that's okay, because at 95 points, they're an enormously valuable tool for performing secondaries in your opponent's backfield and for putting hurt on the stuff that's trying to die for putting hurt on the stuff that's trying to hide that really needs to die, which is made even easier by additional options for the Exarch's loadout. One more mobility note. Scorpions, of course, can also deep strike. And the ability to hold a unit of these things in reserve and have a bunch of like auto-hitting cool flamer weapons that will be in range when you bring them in that's a deterrent. That changes what your opponent can do and how they can play. But also, there are additional loadout options now for the Exarch. So if you run the Exarch with the build that we all currently have on our Exarchs, because it's like the de facto resin build or metal build if you have Warp Spiders that are old enough to drink, that's now the like, what is it called? The Death Weavers and Power Blade combo. So if you do that, your Exarch has the same gun as the regular Warp Spiders, but it's twin linked, so you reroll wounds, but it only has a 6-inch range, which is probably fine. And then it's got Power Blades, which have 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 4, but twin linked. Ooh, full rerolls. -2 AP, 1 damage, which isn't bad. The problem is Warp Spiders cannot charge anymore after they flicker jump. That one does hurt a bit. That also invalidates something that I said before about Flicker jumping on turn 1 into the opponent's backfield with an attached Autarch. Sorry, I would go back and edit that, but I really have to get this video out. So I'll just say that I still think that that's a credible build. It's just you would move it into the midfield or some defensible, safe place in the midfield on turn 1, and then on turn 2, you'd make a 14-inch move using battle focus, and then you do the thing. It's still not bad, still good. But given that limitation exists, if you want an MSU Warp Spider unit that it can be a good shooting unit and might also perform secondaries for you, but you're not really planning to melee, you can give the Exarch the Spinneret Rifle, which is like a super big death spinner, which is like a regular death spinner, ignores cover, torrent, d6 shots, except it has an 18-inch range instead of 12, and it's strength 5 instead of strength 4, still -1 AP. This one's okay. I generally think that if you're going to have this unit shoot, then you want them all to be shooting, so you want to be within 12, so the extra range isn't really helping you. +1 strength's not bad, right? That's cool. But maybe you do better to just give the Exarch the Exarch Death Spinner, which only has a 12-inch range, but is strength 6 instead of 4 and has -2 AP instead of 1. If I were doing a straight shooting build, that is what I would do. And then if you do want melee, I think instead of the hybrid build, again, the hybrid build is not bad. I have 3 units of Warp Spiders built that way, and I may occasionally put them on the table as additional like spider units. It could happen. But there's also a straight up melee build for the Exarch, and I think that you do the straight up melee build for the Exarch if either you're running it with the Autarch with the build that I was talking about before, or more likely you're running it with Lhykhis. This gives the Exarch a genuinely fearsome melee loadout. The Power Blade Array. It's just all scythes. The Power Blade Array is 10 attacks, hitting on 3s, but of course you would use the Aspects host ability to reroll 1s to hit. So hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s to hit with lethal hits and twin linked. So strength 4, but you would be potentially rerolling everything for twin linked, which is really good. I guess in some cases then maybe you would want, oh no, right, because twin linked gives you full rerolls. And then -2 AP, 1 damage. Like that's a pretty fearsome melee loadout. And it has particularly amazing synergy with something that Lhykhis can do, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I'm just going to say, if, like me, you pre-ordered a box of Warp Spiders and Lhykhis, when it's time to build your Warp Spiders, if you have Lhykhis, I really think you build them with the blades. If you add in Lhykhis, this goes from being a highly mobile shooting threat that's really good into infantry and can put some finishing damage on other stuff and is really good at scoring secondaries, to just an absolute terrifying beat stick that gets some crazy synergy rolling with other units in your army. Let's take a look at Lhykhis. Lhykhis has the standard Phoenix Lord stat line, but with a 12-inch move because she's a Warp Spider, with the 2-up save and the 4-up and Vuln and T3, not so 5 wounds. One thing that Phoenix Lords do not have in their corner, they're not super durable. And now that we don't have Fate dice anymore, not being able to auto save on 6s with our fragile characters, we're going to feel that. But wow, while she's on her feet, is she terrifying. So here's her deal. She joins Warp Spiders. You're not going to run around on her own. Don't do that. She's got the deep strike and all of the things. She's got a pretty good ranged attack, and she's got some pretty good melee damage. But if you just look at the characteristics on her weapons, she might seem like she's not quite worth her 120 points. But let me tell you why she is. Okay, so ranged attacks. Her souped up death spinners also have a 12-inch range. So if her spiders are in range, she's in range. But she puts out D6 plus 3 attacks at strength 6, -2, 1 damage, torrent, ignoring cover, twin linked. You're still going to choose in the shooting phase, you're still going to choose the wound rerolls. It doesn't help her because she's twin linked, but it will help the scorpions in an aspect host. That's some pretty good shooting, right? So even though strength 4 on the spiders and maybe strength 6 on the Exarch and strength 6 on Lhykhis is not like crazy anti-hard target stuff, that simply the volume of auto hitting shots will be enough to devastate infantry units, light infantry units, do some serious damage to heavier infantry units, and put some pretty solid chip damage on tanks and monsters, but especially with twin links on the Phoenix Lord. But it gets better because here's the thing. She has this ability. It's called Whispering Web. After shooting, nominate 1 unit hit by her attacks until the end of turn. Eldar units get criticals on a 5-up when targeting that unit. This is so crazy. Now, it doesn't help the shooting for your warp spiders because they all auto hit. But in an aspect host, you have the ability to give to any of your shooting aspects or the Avatar of Cain sustained hits or lethal hits. So if, for example, you had a nearby unit of Dire Avengers, right? 10 Dire Avengers put out, and they can do some really crazy stuff when led by Asurmen. Let's do those guys next. But 10 Dire Avengers put out 40 shots, and if they're within half range, they do so with sustained hits 1. Let's assume they're not within half range. They put out 40 shots. Well, you could, for a CP, give them lethal hits. So now those 40 shots, and you could choose with the aspect host keyword to have them reroll 1s to hit, and on a 5-up, they would be auto wounding whatever this thing is, and then they'd get a legit wound roll to push through a few more. They have -1 AP natively, and then you could use a Warwalker to take them to -2, and suddenly, just in the shooting phase alone, like Lhykhis and her warp spiders and some Dire Avengers are like really tearing up, like, I don't know, some heavy enemy vehicle or monster, or like even a knight or something, which is crazy. But it gets even more awesome because she also has a crazy good melee profile that has really good synergy with her Whispering Web ability, and she has a melee power called Empiric Ambush, which lets her unit, including the warp spiders, that's your unit, charge in a turn in which they flicker jumped. This is why you give the Exarch the power blades, which have 10 attacks with lethal hits and twin linked, right? Because if she's just given everything critical hits against the thing, when you charge into melee, the Exarch has 10 attacks, rerolling 1s to hit, because obviously you're going to choose that one for aspect host, and a third of those initially are just going to go through with lethal, and then you are going to reroll some 1s and maybe get another lethal, and then those power blades have, like, they're twin linked, so then you get to reroll your wound rolls also. And there's good AP. And then Lhykhis herself has 10 attacks too. She puts out 5 attacks with her Weave Render, which hit on 2s, -2 AP, damage 2, lethal hits again. So you'd be hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, doing lethals on 5-up. And then her Spider Fang, 5 more attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 4, -2 AP again, 1 damage instead of 2, extra attacks. But again, lethal hits. So that's just... Even if you don't have the shooting support from some other unit, like, this is a 6 model aspect unit that can flicker jump into your opponent's backfield, shoot it with crazy volume of shooting with chip damage, and then charge, and between, just forget the warp spiders, just the Exarch and Lhykhis will put out 20 attacks, getting lethals on 5-ups, rerolling 1s, and then rerolling all the wound rolls when that comes around with -2 AP and some flat 2 damage and some 1 damage, and that's just not bad at all. That's like pretty heckin' good. And it's like 215 points. That's a really powerful tool for 215 points that potentially also can give everything else in your army lethal hits into the thing. There's no matchup in which this is bad to have. Also, I said in my first video that it's going to be absolutely essential in Eldari lists because of how Eldar play now. Eldar are much more fragile than they used to be. To have some Alpha Strike units that will exist predominantly to pick up your opponent's units that are particularly good for countering Eldari. So especially your opponent's fast stuff. The most important stuff to take away from your opponent will be the stuff that's fast enough to get angles. And this is just a great unit for doing that. And if you're really smart, you'll set it up, or sometimes this won't be possible, but if possible, if you can, you'll set it up so that when Lhykhis and her warp spiders finish murdering something in melee, they're then close enough to a ruin to fade back through it after they get shot, if they get shot. Or maybe you use sudden strike to have them blitz into something else so your opponent can't just shoot you on her turn. Or you use sudden strike to blitz into something else, and then if your opponent runs away from you, you use the ability that lets you then make the battle focus ability that lets you like move through a wall to be out of sight. Like this requires some forward planning and cleverness. But if the short version is if you do this near terrain, there are tricks that may let you keep the warp spiders from being shot on your opponent's turn and then continue to be a threat, which would just be really awesome. Okay, Dire Avengers, the basic bees of the Aspect Warrior world, and yet I love them. They're so great. Mine have been riding the bench since 9th edition. They were really good in 9th edition. And I think in an Aspect host, they're really good again. The Dire Avenger Shuriken Catapult doesn't have lethal hits anymore, but you can use the stratagem in an Aspect host to give it lethal hits, and it got +1 attack, which I think is actually a totally solid trade. It still has assault. So every single one of those Dire Avengers has 4 attacks with an 18-inch range, hitting on 3s, strength 4, -1, 1. And of course, in an Aspect host, you can use the Preternatural strat to give them either sustained hits or lethal hits, or you could throw away an Aspect Shrine token and give them both. And if you ran them in a squad of 10, you could do that twice, which isn't bad. And they're not expensive. 75 points for 5, 150 points for 10. At 75 points, these 5 elf units could potentially move around the board. They could perform secondaries, screen, be a credible chip damage threat, really mess up enemy infantry units. I probably will not use them in that role. I like things that are a little bit faster for that, and we have some cheap stuff that's fast. But I certainly think they are usable in that way, especially in an Aspect host where they've also got rerolls either to hit or wound. But I think the 10 elf unit buffed can potentially be a pretty powerful midboard anchor unit, especially if you throw in the Phoenix Lord. Oh, I will just say that when you're building out the squad, I think that like before, like in most other editions, you just give the Exarch the second Shuriken Catapult. So a squad of 5 actually puts out 24 shots, and a squad of 10 would actually put out 44 shots. And 44 shots, rerolling ones to hit with lethal hits or sustained hits, depending on what you're targeting, is not bad. And again, this just has great synergy with stuff like the Warwalker that gives you, if a Warwalker shoots something, you get extra AP into that thing. I think Warwalkers are 95 points. So it's just it's a great tool for letting things like Dire Avengers just punch above their weight. There are 2 melee builds for the Exarch, and they're fine, but they have the classic problem of the melee sergeant and a unit that doesn't want to be in melee combat, where if everything goes well, you'll just never use that model. Oh, and they also have a grenade strat. So again, like as a midboard anchor unit, they can lead with D6 or 6d6 dice every 4 up as a mortal wound into anything, and that's always good. Although finding CP for the grenade strat in the Aspect host might occasionally be challenging, certainly maybe challenging more than once per game, because we're going to want to use other strats pretty often. Another reason to have the Autarch leading your Dark Reapers so you're not paying for Skyborn Sanctuary. Unless, of course, you're using that on your dragons. The only issue with that stratagem is what to use it on. You're gonna use it like every turn. All right, let's talk about Asurmen here, and how he can really juice Dire Avengers and just be awesome on his own. He's the most expensive Phoenix Lord. He's 135 points, and he should be the most expensive, bestest Phoenix Lord probably because he was the first one. He taught all of the other ones how to be Phoenix Lords. Okay, here are the things that Asurmen can do. He's got the standard Phoenix Lord stat line, but most notably, he gives shoot and scoot to Dire Avengers. So while leading a unit, this unit can make a 6-inch move, normal move, after shooting. Cannot charge if you do so, but that means if he's leading 10 Dire Avengers with the extra catapult on the Exarch, they forget Asurmen's shooting just for a moment, which is very good. They're putting out those 44 shots with the rerolls from the Detachment Ability potentially boosted with a stratagem, and they just they step out of a ruin, they hose something, and they move 6 inches completely out of line of sight, and they just keep doing that with Asurmen, who's adding his own shooting, which is also no joke. He's got the Bloody Twins. That's what they've always been called. They have a 24-inch range. They're 6 shots. They hit on 2s, strength 5, -1, flat 2. So really good into stuff like Marines. But in addition, once per battle, when selected to shoot, the Bloody Twins, they gain damage 3, anti-infantry 3, and devastating wounds, which means into something like Terminators, Space Marine Terminators, they become absolutely fearsome because every failed save is a dead Terminator, and you can do the trick that I was talking about before, right? Where you trigger, you spend 1 shrine token to trigger sustained hits, 1 for the whole unit, and then you use the other shrine token to guarantee that Asurmen triggers sustained hits against the Terminators or whatever, and you're rerolling all of your 1s. So Asurmen alone ends up putting 5 wounds on some Terminators at -3 flat 3 damage, and then the rest of the Avengers, with their sustained hits and their rerolling 1s to hit, are also doing some real damage. And you could pick up a squad of heavy infantry, or potentially do that same thing with lethal hits and do some real damage to a vehicle or a monster. And then he's really good in melee. When it comes down to it, and he's got to charge in there, the Sword of Azur is 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 6, -3, flat 3 damage, devastating wounds. So potentially against something like Terminators or some similar heavy infantry, you pull this trick in the shooting phase. You don't fade back through the wall. You charge, and you just finish off the squad that way. And you could use, if you have 2 Aspect Shrine tokens in a big squad, you could use the second one in melee to push through 3 automatic damage against something with Asurmen, and at strength 6 declare rerolls to wound if it's against a tank or a monster or something. And that's just a really powerful anchor beat stick in the midfield that can shoot and scoot, shoot and scoot, shoot and scoot, and then when the time is right, shoot, move, shoot, charge, trigger something crazy, and just really do some damage. The trick to making this work effectively is going to be positioning, right? You've got to be close enough to make that 18-inch range work. You need to be close enough to a ruin or something to scoot back through. You need to be moving and screening and positioning in other ways so your opponent can't get other beads. It's going to all be all about board control. But shoot and scoot's always really good, and that's an incredibly powerful shooting unit for shoot and scoot. The 10 Avengers are 150 points. You throw Asurmen in there, and it takes them to 285. That's expensive, but it's not too expensive for that tool. All right, let's talk Banshees and Jane Czar. As many of you know, these girls are near and dear to my heart. They're my favorite aspect warrior. I'm an Ibersol player. I have I have 28 Banshees in my collection, fully painted and ready to rock. And Janzar, I love running them. Oh, you know what? One more thing about Asurmen. The other option is Asurmen with 5 Avengers and the Twin Shuriken Catapults jumping in and out of a Falcon initially with Skyborn Sanctuary and benefiting from the Falcon's full rerolls into stuff. So you give them rerolls to hit, you give them full rerolls to wound. Maybe if you trigger a strat for something like lethal hits on the front end or sustained hits, again, potentially that's a really good damage dealing tool. Whether or not you want to do that in place of a unit of fire dragons really is the question, but also a good way to use the unit. All right, Banshees, my favorite elf girls, ladies, female screaming murder elves. Banshees have been reimagined to do the job that they have historically done again well, instead of being sort of generic infantry killers that could maybe do some other stuff out of a Falcon. Now they're like specifically the anti-heavy infantry melee unit. They can still advance and charge, which is great. And now that there is a battle focus ability that lets you shut down Overwatch, also good for the dragons, right? And the Avengers. Now that there's an ability that lets you shut down Overwatch, they're more viable. And they're even faster than they were before. They still have an 8-inch move and they can advance and charge. But now that we have access to battle focus, they can essentially advance. They can advance 8 plus 2 plus D6 and then charge. They've got an even longer threat range, which is great. Another 3 inches if they come out of a Falcon, which gives them full rerolls to wound, which is if it shoots the thing with fire support, super useful. The Banshee Blade is down to only 2 attacks, but it's up to flat 2 damage. But it's down to AP 2, but now it has anti-infantry 3 up. So even really tough stuff, they're always going to wound on a 3. Infantry. The Mirror Swords just give the Exarch an extra Banshee Blade, so the whole squad, like at that point, the whole squad would have an extra 2 attacks. So 5 of them, instead of having 10 attacks, would be rolling in at 12 attacks. Or you can take the Triscale and a Banshee Blade. I don't do that. You can take the Executioner, which also has anti-infantry 3. It has 3 attacks instead of the 4 attacks for the extra Banshee Blade, but it's strength 6, minus 3 damage flat 3. I think that you generally take the Executioner, which I'm a little bummed about because I have some beautifully painted ones with Banshee Blades, and my the ones with the Executioner are just not as nice looking. Also, they're the older models with the Executioner, but it gives the squad some play into a wider variety of infantry targets. They obviously, when you charge with them, you're going to be able to choose to reroll hits or reroll wounds. In some cases, depending on what you're targeting, it might not really matter. They do have a weapon skill of 2 now, which is an improvement. So fewer attacks, but they're going to hit more reliably. I do worry a little bit with Banshees that even hitting on 2s and with the flat 2 damage, they might... It's unfortunate in the rerolls and the aspect host. It's unfortunate that there's no stratagem in the aspect host that can give them, can do for them in the melee phase what preternatural precision can do for shooting units in the shooting phase. Because if they could get sustained hits, that could really give them the extra little oomph I think they may need to really get there. So if you take the glaive to give yourself some play also into tougher, bigger stuff, to be able to put chip damage potentially on monsters or light vehicles, and you charge some Marines, you'll have 11 attacks. If you decide to reroll misses, you may hit with all of those. You wound infantry on a 3 up. So let's say you wound with 7. Your opponent is going to save on 5s, except against the glaive where they'll save on 6s. They can just about kill 5 Marines as long as you don't roll poorly and your opponent doesn't roll unusually well. They just about pretty much get there, and that's in the aspect host, which has me worrying a little bit that if they're not running in the aspect host, they may struggle a little bit. But they do have fights first, and this is a unit that can also be used in other ways. charging through walls, advancing and charging with a battle focus move into your opponent's backfield to check an enemy vehicle, to tie something up in melee. They've got a 5-up invuln save, but a 4-up invuln save in melee. And also just screening. One of the things that we're going to run into with Aeldari, I think in many cases we're going to want some kind of anchor unit moving up into the midfield that's going to want to be doing fade back with tricks. Like I talked about a Guardian Command Squad in my first video, where you really trip it out with like a bunch of Warlocks and a Farseer and maybe a D-Clint cannon platform. And it's especially good in the Seer Host detachment because you can teleport it around. It's really expensive, but pretty powerful unit. Similarly, the Dire Avengers with Asurmen, one of the things that they will be vulnerable to as a counter is quick enemy infantry that's pretty good in melee. Even if Asurmen carves up whatever that is, he won't do it until after that unit has maybe killed most of the Avengers. So being able to screen something like Asurmen and his Avengers, or a Guardian Command unit that's hiding in ruins in the midfield with some Banshees that are like blocking that ruin wall and can fight first, and then in the latter half of the game run out and be really fast, screedy murder elves that do cleanup, could really work. It could really make sense to have a unit of Banshees for that. Also, being able to jump out of a Falcon, charge a thing, have full rerolls against the thing, because with Aspect Host they reroll ones to hit, and then the Falcon, if it uses fire support, will let them reroll ones to wound, or all the wound roll, so they'll have full rerolls against whatever it is with decent AP and multi-damage weapons. Like, that's not bad. And they could potentially then jump back into the vehicle with Skyborn Sanctuary if it follows them up. Like, that's a solid combo. There are probably ways to use them. But at 90 points, I wanted Banshees to be 80. I kind of think they should be 80. At 90 points, they may be getting nudged out by some of this other stuff. And again, I think the best argument for using them is in an Aspect Host. But probably currently the way to use them is to take one and have them as a screening unit in the first half of the game and a cleanup unit in the later half. Maybe, though, throwing Jane Zar in changes that a bit. Let's look at her. Jane Zar is one of the cheaper Phoenix Lords at 105 points. So if you throw her into a squad of Banshees, they're coming in at 295, 195, just under 200. And she does add more damage output to the squad, I think, than would simply adding another 5 Banshees for 15 points less than the Phoenix Lord, or at least a comparable amount, and she introduces some other advantages. Jane Zar's profile has been simplified, not inconsiderably. The Blade of Destruction, which also has anti-infantry 3, no longer has multiple profiles. It's just 8 attacks, hitting on 2s. Again, in the Aspect Host, you could reroll ones with that. Strength 6, nice, minus 3 AP, flat 2 damage, really good at killing heavy infantry. And when she's leading the unit, it automatically advances 6 and ignores vertical distances when moved. The ignoring vertical distances thing is pretty awesome. They can kind of do the Harlequin thing and just like jump over stuff. They can run through walls, so it's only like, it only matters for hills and weird terrain, but it also means that they can like leap onto the roofs of buildings and attack stuff that would be hard to reach, which is cool. Now, I do have one question about the Whirling Death ability that maybe one of you can answer cleverly in the comments. Jane Zar's ability says that when she advances, when the unit advances, because remember, it can advance and charge, while leading a unit, each time it advances, automatically adds 6. Automatically adds 6. It doesn't say the dice roll is automatically a 6. It says automatically adds 6. Do you see what I'm worried about? I'm worried that means that if you use battle focus, you don't move d6 plus 2, you move 6, which would be not awesome and kind of an unnecessary debuff, considering that I think that we're already with this unit kind of like right on the edge of it being pretty good. There is a build in which I think that Banshees stop being a little bit marginal and definitely become good. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that they're bad. I think that the 200 point Jane Czar Banshee unit that puts out around 20, it could be 20 if you take the mirror swords, flat 2 damage attacks with good AP, hitting on 2s with rerolls, like it's not bad. Like that'll seriously mess up all sorts of like medium weight heavy infantry, like big units of Space Marines, whatever. And she's got a shooting attack on the front end too. Like the Silent Death is not bad. It's 6 attacks, hitting on 2, strength 6 -2, only 1 damage though. But you know, that's another dead heavy infantry. I think that the build in which this definitely gets there is a build in which you've included Eldrad, which can point at things and be like, Eldred can say everybody gets +1 to wound against that. And if you're running Eldred in the midfield with the big Guardian Command squad that's doing other stuff and it's using fade back and whatever, then like maybe. I think the complexity is that in an aspect host detachment, you probably want Asurmen and the Dire Avengers, not Eldred. And I'm not sure that Jane Czar and the Banshees really get the job done outside an aspect host detachment. Because the other way that we could deliver flat 2 damage in spades is with shuriken cannons on bikes. And we can do that. And also the sheer fire output on something like Dire Avengers means that even though they do 1 damage, they can still really mess up medium weight infantry. I don't know. I think Banshees are an almost. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to play around with them a ton. Again, they're my favorite aspect warrior, and I think they're good, and I'm going to try to make them work. But I do think that they're lagging a little bit behind some of the others in terms of raw output. I think at 90 points they should just have sustained hits 1 on their melee weapon. I think that would do it. As it is, I think it's a little touch and go, and I would love to be wrong about this because I love them. Okay, let's move on to the other melee aspects, which go a little bit faster because they don't have Phoenix Lords. There's 2 of them. We'll start with the Shining Spears. Shining Spears definitely got a big glow up. They just weren't getting there in the index, and they've gotten some pretty significant improvements to their damage output, but not to their durability, which is going to create some interesting tensions. So Shining Spears are 120 points. They're fast, pretty good at killing heavy infantry. I think that they are going to be challenging to use, and I think they are a little bit of a toss up. And there's huge disagreement around Shining Spears in the community. Goonhammer thinks they're great. Art of War thinks they suck at 120 points. And actually, one of the things I really like about this new book is top players do not agree. They do not agree about what's good. Everyone agrees fire dragons are great. But broadly speaking, and like detachments, there's widespread disagreement about this codex, which I think is a great sign. I think it's great. Let's take a look at Shining Spears. I'll tell you what I think. So there's 3 models in the squad. You can run them with 6. They do not want to run in squads of 6 because you only get a lot of the damage comes from the Autarch. You're only getting the 1, and 240 points is just 2. That's really expensive for how these things want to play. So you're running them in 3s. They have a 14-inch move. They're T4. They have a 3-up save. The regular spears in the squad, there's 2 of those. They have 2 wounds. They have OC2. I like that they have OC2. I think that's cool. And then the Exarch has 3. So basically, from a defensive perspective, a squad of Shining Spears is 3 Space Marines, but they have a 5-up invulnerable save, and the Sergeant has an extra wound. But that's really fragile. They're really fragile. However, in the squad, presuming you take all lances, you will have 2 laser lances and 1 star lance. And Shining Spears, as we all know, are a hybrid shooting melee threat. And I think one of the reasons that Art of War thinks these things suck is they're thinking about them purely as a melee threat. But if you don't take into account the damage that they do in the shooting phase, you completely invalidate like 40% of close to 40% of their total damage output. So they have a a shuriken cannon on the Exarch, and they have shuriken catapults on the regular shining spears, and all of the spears, of course, can make a shooting attack. They've also gotten a bonus that really helps them over index spears. They have something called extreme mobility. They now ignore vertical distance when moving. One of the problems with spears before was that banshees could run through walls and spears couldn't. So banshees could advance and charge. So even though spears had a 14-inch move, they were like functionally slower than banshees on the field, and they potentially could fill sort of a similar role, right? Like banshees now do flat 2 damage, spears do flat 3 damage, which puts them in this place where they're both like theoretically good at killing heavy infantry, very heavy infantry, and maybe also hitting tanks and monsters. But the ability to just fly over stuff, like fly over a building, that's big. It's just as good as being able to run through walls. In the shooting phase, the shuriken cannon is putting out 3 shots at strength 6 with lethal hits. The shuriken cannons are now lethal, not sustained. Minus 1 AP flat. 2, and because of the lethal hits on the shuriken cannon, you may, you're not going to trigger the strat with these, I don't think. Probably. There might be some, actually, I'm rethinking it. There might be some argument for triggering preternatural precision to try to get sustained hits on some of the laser lance shots, but they don't have an aspect shrine token to spend, so maybe not. But they have some decent shooting. So they've got 3 shots from the shuriken cannon and 4 from the shuriken catapults, and presumably you're rerolling ones to hit, and the cannon's got the lethals, and then you've got full rerolls on the cannon. Then the 2 star lances are each putting out a shot, hitting on 3s at strength 9, minus 3 flat 3. I'm sorry, the 2 laser lances, strength 6, minus 2 flat 3, and then the star lance hitting on 3s, strength 9, minus 3 flat 3. That's some pretty solid shooting. What are the ideal targets for that? Like, what are these things supposed to kill? Well, at strength 6 and 9, respectively, they want to hunt heavy infantry, so infantry with 2 wounds, ultra heavy infantry, infantry with 3 wounds, light tanks and monsters, stuff that's like T9 or less. But then in melee, they suddenly have the ability to punch up into vehicles and monsters that maybe don't fit in that category, because the laser lance has anti-vehicle 3 up, and it also has anti-monster 3 up, and so does the star lance. So in the shooting phase, they're less likely to ding really tough vehicles and monsters, stuff that's strength 12 or more. But in the melee phase, they've got some game. They're going to put out a total in the melee phase. They're going to put out a total of 10 attacks if you give them the full lance loadout. So you'll have 6 attacks with the laser lance hitting on 3s at strength 5. But if you attack a tank or a monster, you're still going to be wounding it on a 3 up, which is pretty good. Minus 2 AP, flat 3 damage. 3's a lot, right? And especially because there's a stratagem that lets you ignore damage reduction. Potentially that could be really good. As well as modifiers to your hit roll, which could really interfere with these dudes. The Star Lance is similar, but it's got an extra attack. So a total of 10 melee attacks on the unit. Now, here's how the numbers shake out. If you charge a tank that you've just shot with some stuff, you're going to attack 10 times, and you're going to choose rerolls on something. You're probably going to be hitting and wounding on 3+, so it doesn't really matter, I don't think, what you choose. But theoretically, let's say you choose hits. You're going to end up hitting 7 or 8 times, wounding around 5 times, and probably getting about 3 attacks through. So on average, if you charge a vehicle or a monster that does not have an invuln, you're going to do about 9 damage in the melee phase. Art of War kind of hates this because it means that you don't kill the thing. But if you also were able to shoot with the catapults and the cannon and the 3 lances, you probably did another 3 or 4 damage in the shooting phase, which means you do kill the thing. And then, yes, your Shining Spears do in fact die to a stiff breeze. So there's kind of two ways to think about how to use these things. One is they move into the midfield in the beginning of the game to set up a turn 2 charge. The other is that you hold them back as counter punchers for stuff that comes into the midfield. In higher level play, I think really they're probably counter punchers, because I think in higher level play, if you try to move them into the midfield, your opponent's going to have something that's going to be able to get a beat on them and pop them. For 120 points, it's incredibly frustrating how easy it is to kill these things. If an opponent can get a beat on them, I mean, think about it from an Eldari perspective. How hard is it really to kill 3 Space Marines with an extra move with shooting? Not hard at all. And in order for these things to have enough damage output to be worth their points, they've got to be within 6 inches of their target. And yes, you can use Battle Focus to give them a 16-inch move, but that's not enough to really get where you need to be out of the gate, which kind of does put them in the counter puncher category. So you're like killing stuff that moves into the midfield, and they're vulnerable to stuff that's coming in out of deep strike that can get a beat on them and shoot them off the board. And also in non-aspect warrior, non-aspect host lists where they're not going to get rerolls on the front end, their damage output goes down that much more. So here's what I think. When I made my initial video and I talked about spears, I was kind of excited about them, but I also thought that spears were going to be, I hadn't seen the points yet. Honestly, I thought banshees were going to roll in around 80 and spears were going to roll in like at 105 or something. And at 120, I think they're pushing it, but they don't need, what they have going for them is they don't need anything. They're not sucking up stratagems. They don't need to be put in a transport. The only thing they're really going to use is one of your battle focus tokens. And you probably are going to need melee counterpunchers in your list for stuff that moves into the midfield. And so if you don't have something else, maybe it is spears. But I'm a little skeptical about these as units that are going to like hunt down units in your opponent's backfield, which is, unless you're already like winning this game by a pretty significant margin, which is initially what I was hoping that they potentially could be. But they're expensive enough that I think there's going to be a good argument for taking stuff in this role that's maybe a little bit more durable. Okay, let's talk about striking scorpions. I want to start the other melee aspect. I'd like to just start by saying that my favorite thing about striking scorpions is that they are cheap. One of my favorite things. They're 75 points, which makes them 10 points more expensive than they were in the index, but tied with Dire Avengers for the cheapest aspect warriors, and they have some additional utility. They're, in some ways, their combat has improved. In some way, their combat has been nerfed a little bit. They're basically doing the thing that they were doing before, except they have a little more flexibility, and now they can be run with an Autarch to juice their damage output, but they no longer have access to Karandros to jump out of a Falcon and be an absolute melee nightmare. But the Karandros build aside, they're kind of still in the same role. They're good for performing secondaries. They're a cheap enough unit to be disposable if you need them to be disposable, but they still can hit pretty hard in melee if you want them to. So here's their deal. They have the standard aspect warrior stat line, and they still infiltrate, but they also scout 7 and they have stealth. So the ability to make a 7-inch move before the game begins is really good because you find out who's going first, and either you potentially position them to be aggressive, if that makes sense, or you position them conservatively so they're not getting charged or shot off the board on turn 1 so they can do something for you. They're cheap enough that if you need to sacrifice them to do a secondary in the midfield, you can, and they have that pre-game mobility that makes that extra good. But they're also a solid little combat unit for anti-infantry elimination in melee. The Scorpion Chainsword has gotten some changes. So it's sustained hits 1 still. I think that's the same. 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 4, but -1 AP now. Having some AP on that is really, really good. And the Manda Blaster no longer gives us access to devastating wounds in melee, which is sad against infantry. But the Manda Blaster does provide critical hits if the Scorpions charge, which means a third of our hits will trigger the sustained hits on the Scorpion Chainsword. There is only one build that makes sense now, and that is to give the Exarch the Biting Blade. The Scorpion Claw is not as good as it was before. It does not have sustained hits, so it has absolutely no synergy at all with Manda Blasters. The Biting Blade also has sustained hits 1, and it's also 4 attacks, but it's strength 5 instead of strength 4, and it's AP minus 3 instead of AP minus 1, which is actually really good. You can also give the Exarch a pair of chain swords, the Chain Sabers, which is 5 attacks at only AP minus 1 with sustained hits 1, but it's twin linked, which is good. I think I'm in for the extra AP, but you know, twin linked the rerolls to wound. That's really good. And you can, of course, use the Aspect Host ability to give them rerolls to hit, which will also give you, and that's the move because you want to trigger more sustained hits rather than rerolls to wound. And the Aspect Shrine tokens are there to push through a hit roll or a wound roll. 4 of them have the Shuriken pistol. If you take the Scorpion's Claw, you get a twin linked shooting attack, but you shouldn't. You always take the Biting Blade with these guys. They're good. They're pretty straightforward. Again, I've already talked about what they don't have Phoenix Lord, so the only other option is to throw an Autarch into the squad. The whole thing becomes 150 points, but now they have the grenade strat available to them, and they have a Starglaive, and they have a fusion gun, and now like they're an actually very scary midfield counterpuncher. Some of us may want to play around with that. It may be a little bit meta dependent. If somebody's bearing down on the midfield hard in the beginning of the game, maybe it makes sense to throw that Autarch in. And the Autarch's ability would let them use the grenade strat for free also, which could be kind of cool. And I do think that you're going to want some stuff because, again, Eldari are very fragile. You don't want opponents right on top of you turn 1, so you don't want them deploying a bunch of forward deploy units within 9 inches of you. So having some stuff that forward deploys, can scout into the midfield and screen out your backfield isn't bad. And Scorpions at 75 points are still, I think, a really good pick for this. But now that there's 75 in to consider Rangers instead, I will talk about Rangers, though, in a later video. Okay, let's talk about Swooping Hawks. So you probably already know that Swooping Hawks have significantly changed in their role. The standard Hawk unit, Hawks got increased in points multiple times during the index, partially because their uppy downy power. You know, they could leave the field every turn and deep strike somewhere else, which really helped with secondaries. That was really good. That's gone. You only get that power now if you take Baharroth, which is fine. Swooping Hawks have stayed relatively cheap, though. They're only 85 points. They have a 14-inch move. They've got the standard Aspect Warrior stat line. And then in place of the old uppy downy power, they have a grenade pack. If the unit jumps over, like moves over an enemy unit, when they're making a normal move, an advanced move, or a fall back move, which is interesting. This could be actually kind of cool with the fall back move. You roll a d6 for every Swooping Hawk model in the unit. And on a 4-up, you do a mortal wound to the target. They also have the grenades keyword, letting them use the strat, but they can't use the strat if they used their grenade pack, which is a little bit of a bummer because that would give them really good utility as like a mortal wound spam engine. As it is, not being able to use the grenade strat, I don't know. The grenade strat is like slightly better than the grenade pack. The advantage to the grenade pack is it doesn't cost you a CP. So Hawks are good on their own. They're good-ish. Their regular gun, their Las Blaster, has assault and lethal hits. So they could move 14 plus D6, or probably in many cases you would use the battle focus abilities with these guys. So they move like 16 or 16 plus D6. And it still has 4 attacks. It still hits on 3s. It's still strength 4. It still has no AP. It still does 1 damage. You can give the Exarch the Hawk's Talon, the better gun, which only has 2 attacks now, but it's strength 6, minus 2 AP, flat 2 damage. And it's got lethal hits. That is a much more interesting profile than before. And because of lethal hits, I think when you run them in an aspect host, you always are going to reroll hits to wound. Their shooting threat is definitely improved. Those 2 additional attacks that are like pretty good at popping Space Marines are good. Alternatively, you could give the Exarch like a power sword and a quirky little pistol thing, or you can just give it a scatter laser. Scatter lasers fire 6 shots and have sustained hits, which is cool. I kind of like the Hawk's Talon. Having that AP is nice. Flat 2 damage is nice. But if you're planning to use the whole unit to eliminate light infantry when it shoots, the scatter laser might be the pick. The power sword has 5 attacks and minus 2 AP, but only 1 damage. And I feel like maybe you don't really want to get wrapped up in melee with the squad. I feel like the power sword is something that you would take if you were running them with an Exarch who had a melee build, who was going to fly around with them and use its Starglaive and fusion gun stuff, and then maybe you think about it. I'm currently of the opinion that at 85 points, I would rather run something like Shroud Runners in this role. I think Shroud Runners are really good. They're just as fast as Hawks, but they're a little bit more durable, and they have more long range and slightly better shooting. And I'm just not that impressed with the grenade power. On the other hand, if you run them with Baharroth, it kind of changes the whole calculus. I mean, I guess maybe in an aspect host, because of the aspect thing, maybe there's an argument for running Hawks instead of Shroud Runners in that role. But I don't know. But if you are going to run a unit of these things, I think it definitely makes sense to consider running them with Baharroth. Let's look at what that looks like. We add Baharroth into the squad, and suddenly they're crazy good. So first of all, Baharroth is like all Phoenix Lords. He has pretty good shooting and pretty good melee. He's got the standard Phoenix Lord stat line, but with the 14-inch move because he's a swooping hawk. His ranged weapon is the Fury of the Tempest. It has assault and lethal hits. It's 4 attacks, hitting on 2, strength 6, minus 1 AP, flat 2 damage. But it's better than it sounds. I'm going to get to that. And then he's got a melee weapon, the Shining Blade. Sustained hits 1, 6 attacks. Hits on 2s, strength 5, minus 2, flat 2. That's actually really good with sustained hits. But here's where it gets crazy. When he's leading a unit of swooping hawks, they not only can they do uppy downy, but on the data sheet it says that when they come down, so that is they fly off the board into strategic reserves at the end of an enemy turn, and then you can deep strike it on your own turn. It says on the data card that they can do this anywhere within 3 inches of an enemy unit. This all such abilities have been errataed or edited, so now it's within 6 inches. But that's still really good because it means they can charge. And he has the Cry the Wind ability. When set up on the battlefield, this model gets critical hits on every successful hit roll on ranged attacks. So that means that every turn, Baharroth and the Hawks that he's leading go back into Deep Strike. They come out. The Hawks have pretty good shooting. If you're running this, you take the Exarch with the Power Sword, I think. Baharroth is going to, every time he hits with his Fury of the Tempest, which has lethal hits, and he hits on 2s, and you could choose to reroll 1s, so he's going to hit with all of them, that will automatically wound the target with minus 1 AP and flat 2 damage. If you have a Warwalker somewhere on the field, you could actually make that minus 2 damage, and suddenly Baharroth could be actually kind of putting the hurt on vehicles and monsters just with his shooting attack. And then when they charge, Baharroth Baharroth would be hitting on 6s with sustained hits 1, and you could be rerolling 1s to generate yet more, minus strength 5, minus 2 AP flat 2, and the Exarch, if you take the Power Blade, also has some pretty good melee, and suddenly this unit's pretty good into like medium weight infantry, and the uppy downy ability, like before, makes it really easy for you to score secondaries, which is good. Baharroth is 115 points. Sweeping Hawks are 85. That makes this package a flat 200. And that, my friends, is a pretty powerful tool for 200 points. It is not, I don't think, going to be amazing in the early game. It'll be kind of fine in the early game. But as you get into the later part of the game where your opponent is less able to screen their backfield and they have vulnerable units trying to hold objectives or just do stuff that need to die, this could be a really, really powerful cleanup tool. And you could always use the stratagem, right? The precision stratagem to also get sustained, to mess with it, to increase it further. I do think that in general, you're going to be wanting to use that stratagem on other stuff. But this is a highly mobile, pretty powerful tool. And I think at 200 points, it's solidly worth it, especially in an aspect host, but also in other detachments. Not an auto include, but very good. And it goes with that overall Codex Eldari theme of like, you simply cannot hide from us. Wherever you go, we're going to be there. Okay, and lastly, let's talk about the Avatar of Khaine. The Avatar of Khaine is significantly less durable than it was before, and no longer has access to the murderous fate dice manipulation that it had before. But it nevertheless is probably the most durable unit available to Eldari. It does have good damage output, and it's 300 points. I think that particularly in an aspect host, it makes serious sense to consider the Avatar. I think it is a bummer that it does not have an aspect shrine token to automatically roll a 6 at some point. A lot of the tricks that it used to pull, like auto hitting with Overwatch, pushing through dev wounds, it can't do that stuff anymore. I'm sorry, pushing through sustained hits, it can't do that stuff anymore. Nor can it stand in the open and just absorb crazy firepower because you've thrown Fortune on it and it's T12, so most stuff is at best wounding it on a 5-up. That's not the world we live in. It's down to T11, which is especially brutal because it means like las cannons wound it on a 3-up, and there's no way to increase the toughness. It still halves damage, which is nice. But without Fortune, a lot of stuff essentially has +2 to wound against it, which is big. And in an aspect host detachment, it can't have lightning fast. You can't make it -1 to hit. So that's a thing too. But on the other hand, in some ways, I guess it's improved a little bit. The profile in the Wailing Doom is a bit better. It's strength 16 on its strike attack. Still hits on 2s like before. 6 attacks hitting on 2s. Strength 16, -4 d6 + 2. You can't fate die cheat that. And then the sweep attack is strength 12 hitting on 2s. I'm sorry, 12 attacks hitting on 2s. Strength 8, which is good because stuff like Marines, it's going to wound on a 2-up. Flat 2 damage, -2 AP. So it'll wade through things like Marines. And remember, we've got that stratagem that lets us ignore modifiers to weapon skills and damage. So stuff that reduces incoming damage by 1, it can still do flat 2, which is good. There's the shooting attack with the Wailing Doom, still a 12-inch range. But remember, we've got the stratagem that increases it to 18, hitting on 2s, strength 16, -4 d6 + 2. And we have the stratagem that makes it automatically do 8. I've already talked about under what circumstances you would do that against something with 7, 8, or 8 wounds that doesn't have an invulnerable save that you really wanted to kill. Now, the Avatar can do some things it couldn't do before, right? It has access to fade back. So if it's slightly out in the open and the opponent shoots it with something, after it reduces the incoming damage by half, and still got its 2-up save and its 4-up invuln, it could like walk behind a piece of terrain. or it could get even closer to the opponent. And now that we have access to the battle focus abilities that let us pull all sorts of shenanigans, it's even faster. It doesn't have an advance in charge power, but it natively moves 10. And you can increase that movement to 12 using battle focus. And it automatically gets +1 to charge because it gives all friendly models, and it is a friendly model to itself within 6 inches, +1 to charge. So the Avatar is faster than it was before, somewhat significantly faster than it was before, but less durable. But it still hits really hard in melee, but you can't push through automatic wounds. So it's kind of like a souped up version of a super elf. It needs to play differently than it did before. It wants to move into the midfield early, but for the first couple turns of the game, it wants to keep its head down while you eliminate the stuff that would really be a threat to it. And then when it goes barreling into the enemy, it can do something like wade through a screening unit using its souped up sweep attack, and then use sudden assault to go slamming into something else. And then if your opponent tries to run away with it, you use the ability that lets you move again, right? Like there's these movement shenanigans, but you now have to think about the Avatar as like a fast, incredibly hard-hitting monster that nevertheless needs to play a little bit carefully and keep its head down early. And if you can play an aggressive Alpha Strike trading game early, potentially the Avatar can be an absolutely fearsome beat stick in the second half of the game. And I think that because it benefits from the Aspect Warhost rules, the ability to hit on 2s but reroll 1s, makes it certainly preferable to the other beat stick units you might want to bring, like somewhat durable beat stick units, like a pair of Wraith Lords. Wraith Lords are a unit that are fabulous in a Spirit Conclave and are like pretty good in other detachments. Well, in the Aspect Host, you don't want the 2 Wraith Lords, you want the Avatar. But even in the Aspect Host, it's not an auto include. But it is very good. It's going to be an early game counterpuncher and a late game like bully finisher. I think 300 points is pretty reasonable for what it does. If you think about what else you could get for that, you could get Baharroth and a unit of Hawks and 1 unit of Fire Dragons. You could get Asurmen and 10 Dire Avengers and an enhancement. And I think it's like roughly comparable to that stuff. I think it's well pointed. It is not, however, a crazy good deal. But it might also really help with midfield objective control in the late game. The late mid to late game. And as I said in my first video, we're really going to need to score big on primaries in the mid to late game. All right, I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about list construction, and then I'll sign off. This video is already much longer than I anticipated. I think the auto-include aspect list or aspect host units are Lhykhis and 5 Warp Spiders. I think you have to. Probably also 10 Fire Dragons, either 1 block of 10 or 2 squads of 5. Probably also at least 1 Wave Serpent or Falcon. You're either maybe putting all 10 of those Fire Dragons in the Falcon, or maybe 5 in something else. Maybe 5 go in the Wave Serpent, and 5 others are in Deep Strike. Whatever. There's a lot of ways to do it. The Fire Dragons and the Transport and Lhykhis and the Warp Spiders are going to be among your Alpha Strike units. They're going to help you edit your opponent's list to your advantage and take control of the momentum of the game and determine its direction. And then beyond that, there's some flexibility. I do think that not everybody agrees about this. This is one of those really debated ones, but I think Asurmen and 10 Dire Avengers and an Aspect Host list, it might not be an auto-include, but I really think it borders on one. That is an incredibly potent midfield anchor control unit that with Shoot and Scoot is hard to eliminate and can especially be good into everything. It can be good into everything, especially if you can fit a Warwalker into the list to give some extra AP to those catapults. I think Fuegan borders on being an auto-include, but it's going to get really hard to afford 3 Phoenix Lords if you've already got Lhykhis and you decide to take Asurmen. But Fuegan too. Fuegan is so freaking good. If you don't take Asurmen, it's going to be likely because you took Fuegan. Scorpions, Banshees, Hawks, Spears, additional units of Spiders. All of these are optional. All of these are potentially good picks. Really depends on how you want to play, your meta, and what else you're taking in your list. You also need some fast additional transports. Oh man, Falcons, really competitively pointed. Wave Serpents, amazing. Additional transports are a probable include. Some other units to help you play secondary objectives and screen and control. I didn't mention this in my intro video, and I regret it. I actually really like Void Weavers, although I think I wish they were a little cheaper. They're 125 points, and they've got a weapon with good range, but they cannot be targeted at all outside of 18 inches, which can help you with secondaries and also primaries. There's certainly something to consider. Something like Shroud Runners, maybe in an aspect host, again, you want Hawks, but like fast, cheap, somewhat disposable scoring units are really important for Eldari. Having some melee counterpunchers, also worth considering. And then how are you going to control your own backfield? In an aspect host, for me, 10 Reapers that can jump in and out of a Wave Serpent with an Autarch with the launcher, I'm really excited about that combo with the Mantle of Wisdom. And Shadow Weavers are cheap enough that in any Eldari list, it's a good indirect fire weapon that helps you control your own backfield. I think they're 75 points. And there are other possibilities too, but I think generally the majority of aspect host lists are going to be drawing from those resources. Vipers are another good disposable unit at 65 points. You may want, between your transports and like your Viper or your Walkers or whatever, you might want some number of Bright Lances because they're very long range fire that if you have enough of them can pop something on turn one. And I did mention at one point that there's always, when I was talking about Banshees, there's always the possibility of including Eldred, being able to point at something and give it +1 to wound especially for Dire Avengers and Banshees, but also for Spiders and stuff that has the Twin Link ability. It does let your aspect warriors multi-class into taking out really tough stuff. I think the slightly tricky thing about Eldred and aspect host is that he wants a guardian escort that's probably souped up in some other ways as like a midfield anchor unit. And I think in aspect hosts, the more obvious midfield anchor unit is Asurmen and the Dire Avengers, but it's certainly something to consider. But here's the takeaway. There are a few units in the aspect host that are just absolute auto includes. You need them. You need fire dragons, you need a transport, you need Lhykhis and some spiders. After that, there's tremendous flexibility here. I don't think that there's like, one of the things I love about this codex is that there is not one aspect host list you need to play, or for any of the detachments. I think they all have, not only are they all viable, and they are, which is so exciting, but they are viable with flexibility, which is such an unbelievable gift. If you're new to 40K, you might not know that there have been editions in which entire factions were either not viable at all for competitive play, or they were only because there was one list, and I mean like one list, that artificially inflated their win rate to a point where GW didn't really worry about it. And we live in a feast of plenty with the Eldari options for this book. I'm really excited about it. The aspect host is approachable from a fluff perspective. It's really cool. If you're a Beltan player, it's clearly the direction you want to go. And if you're a new player, it's a lot more approachable than some of the other options. And aspect warriors are awesome. They're just one of the most iconic things about Eldari, and it's really cool to see them in a target elimination slot again after having been something else for so long. And that's what I've got. If you have your own ideas about how you might want to build out an aspect host, or what you think combos you think would be most effective, or what additional units and scoring and support role would be most effective, please leave those in the comments below. Just saying hello helps out the algorithm. If you are so excited to get over onto the Discord and talk more about this with me and other fans of the channel, you could pay $3 a month and become a patron, and that would be awesome. But truly no pressure. I'm going to keep trying to pump this content out as quickly as possible. I will do each of the hosts with the data sheets that are, I'm sorry, the detachments with the data sheets that are most appropriate to that detachment. And by the end of the week, I hope to have covered the whole of the Codex, but we shall see how that shakes out. Until then, best of luck with your plotting, list building, and efforts to develop fluency with some of the newest and most exciting rules in all of Warhammer 40k. Okay, that's what I've got. Take care.